In the midst of the global debate on Cuban foreign affairs, it's important to recognize that if the United States lifts its trade embargo on Cuba, a large influx of American tourists are going to travel there, storming Cuban beaches, destroying valuable coral reefs, and setting off World War III over these natural resources. This was an actual argument I heard at a national tournament when I was a debater. The evidence he used was somewhere on the spectrum of suspicious to non-existent. But on debate, this type of unsupported, fabricated logic, if unrefuted, stands as truth. I was a debater for a year and a half until I came to my senses. And what do debaters love more than anything else? Well, G2 pens, they write so well. But after that, Harvard. But after that, debaters love the perfect piece of empirical evidence. While I was on the debate team, I was taught to first come up with our arguments and then to find the evidence to support them, because you can find evidence for anything online. But the fundamental issue with this mindset is that it devalues the importance of truth. I'm not here, however, to make snarky comments about my mediocre performance on the debate team. A lot of people have really high standards for what is usable as evidence, and debate is just one example of a much larger issue. Fake news or alternative facts have undeniably been plaguing the media we consume. But the ramifications of these deliberate inaccuracies, or more realistically, lies, are even greater than the prominent debate over whether our election was corrupted. Propaganda and misinformation are everywhere. And if we don't start thinking critically about the media we consume, the ramifications could be devastating. So let's try to find the truth. As we look for the source of these falsehoods, recognize their real and often devastating impacts, before finding some ways we can prevent such catastrophes from occurring. And while these catastrophes aren't total global collapse to the degree that destroying Cuban coral reefs would cause, they are worth considering. So let's begin our fake news journey in 1835, when astronomer John Herschel frightened the world with accounts of the giant blue human bat goats he spotted on the moon. They hoarded fruit and talked with their hands, much like Food Network star Giada De Laurentiis. People flocked to newsstands to get a copy of the story, but they were disappointed to discover that the entire story was concocted by the newspaper's editor to make money. Historically, fake news has been most prevalent during times of conflict. During the Spanish-American War, false reports that Spain bombed the USS Maine, causing it to sink, capitalized on Americans' fears of Spanish aggression, and garnered support for the start of the Spanish-American War. I messed that up. This is the Spanish-American War. These news outlets pushed their agendas by giving the American people a villain during a confusing and tumultuous period during history. Similarly, today's heightening tensions between Americans has likewise led to an outbreak of sensationalist misinformation. But today, in the age of the internet, we don't just get our news from a few large corporations, but also from thousands of smaller groups and individuals, each spreading their own accounts. This has exacerbated the issue in two ways. First, competition with newly popular fringe media has forced more mainstream news sources to fabricate drama and outrageous claims in order to retain their audience. Second, the ability of anyone to spread their stories on social media or other digital platforms has increased the pervasiveness of misinformation due to the lack of accountability. While the news industry has traditionally held itself to specific standards, the free-for-all of the internet means that you, I, or Jaden Smith can spout an endless stream of nonsense to an audience of millions. As the star of Karate Kid once wisely observed, most trees are blue. This quick walkthrough of the history of fake news allows us to better understand our current predicament. The Metropolis Tribune reports that 11 out of 12 facts reported by the media are misrepresented. And the worst part about this statistic, I completely made it up. The Metropolis Tribune is the newspaper from The Incredibles, but this just shows how easy it is to fabricate information. On a more legitimate note, the Pew Research Center reported in 2016 that 62% of Americans received their news from social media, the most popular network being Facebook. The problem with this is that much of this information has been falsified in one way or another. In fact, a poll by Monmouth University from 2018 finds that nearly 9 in 10 Americans believe that outside groups are trying to infiltrate social media with fake news stories. These statistics, however, do not represent the real consequences of this issue. A well-known example comes from Alex Jones of InfoWars, who infamously claimed that Hillary Clinton was sexually abusing children and performing satanic rituals in the basement of a Washington, D.C. pizza restaurant. Edgar Welch of North Carolina took it upon himself to drive to Washington with a knife, a handgun, and an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle to free the children he assumed were trapped, only to discover that the restaurant doesn't even have a basement. Luckily, no one was hurt, but not all consequences spurred by false information have been spared this fate. In order to fully recognize these consequences, we must take a broader perspective and look beyond our own nation's struggles. The Holocaust, arguably the largest organized attack against a group of people in recent memory, was fueled by government-sponsored propaganda against the Jewish people. Despite only being 0.2% of the world's population, Jews have historically been the victims of misinformation for the purpose of hate-mongering. A lesser-known example of this was the systematic persecution of Jews in Iraq. Angered by the founding of Israel in 1948, established news sources, with the support of the Iraqi government, spread propaganda and false accusations against prominent Jews. One of those targeted was my grandfather, who was deemed untrustworthy due to his status as a wealthy Jewish man, and he was subsequently thrown in jail. When I asked my grandmother about her experiences during this time, she tells me horrifying stories of public hangings and Jews being dragged around the city of Baghdad while tied to the backs of moving cars. Meanwhile, she was left to care for her 1-year-old daughter alone, unsure of the future for her family. In 2008, the New York Times reported that the number of Jews in Iraq was 7. What was once a thriving religious community of 150,000 now lives on in what could be fewer than the number of people in this room. Due to the destruction that propaganda caused in Iraq, I can say with relative certainty that I will never be able to see the land where my grandparents grew up. If this seems too disconnected from our modern fake news crisis, remember that just last October, 11 Jews were murdered at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh by Robert Bowers, both spread and internalized anti-Semitic falsehoods on social media. And the Anti-Defamation League reported that anti-Semitic acts of vandalism, harassment, and assault increased by 60% from 2016 to 2017, a year when fake news was running rampant. Due to deliberate misinformation, innocent lives have been lost. If the media had more integrity, this issue could be avoided, but sadly this doesn't seem likely. Therefore, it is in our own hands to prevent these atrocities from occurring, and although it may seem impossible, there are actions we can take. You can ensure that your news is credible by staying updated with Pulitzer Prize award-winning nonprofit organization PolitiFact, which checks the validity of every claim made by thousands of news sources and politicians. Or you can download applications like NewsGuard right onto your computer, which consist of real people rating the veracity of a variety of different media outlets. I have to cough. Sorry. By being cautious consumers of media, by confirming the validity of what we are led to believe, by checking multiple trustworthy sources, and by spreading this message to others, we can all work towards a world that is unafflicted by false media claims and begin to heal from the tragedies caused by fake news. I learned many important lessons by being a debater, one of which was the power that cited evidence, both true and false, can have. The idea that some of my smartest peers, the ones who I expect to grow up to become politicians and public figures, are already manipulating the truth to fit their needs, makes me worry. But I am confident that if we work together to see through the lies that block our view of the truth, we can reach a new place. A place inhabited by informed, active, and vigilant citizens. A place defined by truth. And hey, maybe that place is Cuba. I've heard the coral reefs are incredible.